I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. Enrollment in the humanities has been dropping since 2007, and the declines have only been accelerating. College campuses such as West Virginia University and Miami University in Ohio are eliminating or merging humanities programs. Are students truly not interested in the humanities anymore? Is the English major dead? And why should we care? Today, EdCast speaks with 3 English and literature scholars about the state and fate of the humanities today. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today are Mary McGlynn, Matthew Gold, and Katina Rogers. Mary McGlynn is a professor of English at the CUNY Graduate Center and Baruch College. She is also co-chair of the Columbia University Seminar for Irish Studies. She is the author of Broken Ireland's Literary Form in Post-Crash Irish Fiction and Narratives of Class in New Irish and Scottish Literature. Matthew Gold is a CUNY Graduate Center professor of English and the Digital Humanities. He directs the MA program in Digital Humanities and the MS program in Data Analysis and Visualization. His most recent book is Debates in the Digital Humanities 2023, co-edited with Lauren F. Klein. Katina Rogers is the author of Putting the Humanities PhD to Work, Thriving in and Beyond the Classroom, and the upcoming Presence of Absence, Meditations on the Unsayable in Writing. She assists colleges and universities to design creative, sustainable, and equitable structures for graduate education. Thank you so much for joining me today on what is a very rainy day in New York City, so we really appreciate your coming here today. And hi, Katina. We opened today's program with a recognition that humanities enrollment is falling, and that some campuses across the country are actually eliminating degree programs in the humanities and some of the liberal arts. So is this worrisome? And if it is worrisome, why do we still need a vibrant humanities today? Someone want to start it?
I think that it is worth contextualizing the current moment in the larger moments, and I think to look at the height of the growth in college enrollments that came after the GI Bill and the admission of women into college in higher numbers, that we saw what can be perceived as a kind of momentary bump in humanities majors in the 70s, and that the rates now seem to be much more similar to what they were before that. That said, I think humanities as a field of study has maintained its importance throughout this period, and I don't see any reason that we would want to decrease or eliminate programs at precisely the moment that we find ourselves debating ethical questions, or in the wake of COVID, finding ourselves really searching for what is meaningful and important.
Matt, what do you say to that as well?
I agree completely. I think that's a great contextualization. And I would say, too, that as we see technology spurring new developments in STEM fields, especially around ethical issues around AI and topics like that, the humanities have a deeply important role to play around issues of thinking about ethics, about why we are moving forward with technology, what does progress mean in this context, and what do we want the future of the world to be. I think the humanities as a whole help students think critically, learn how to communicate well, and be able to tell their own stories, and those are crucial topics for students to consider.
It seems so odd to me that at a time when AI is making us question what it means to be human, and it becomes really important to think, what is it to be human, that we are trying to obliterate the fields that really ask those questions. Katina, is there anything that you would like to add to this discussion about why we should be worried about losing the humanities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that now more than ever, in a lot of ways, the humanities are important to the ways that we move in the world. Humanities fields are how we make sense of our individual and collective experiences and how we make meaning. It's how we move from a sense of survival to really thriving and living in a way that is meaningful and that connects with cultures around us. So Yeah, I think we need humanities trained people in all sectors. I think this is how we interpret what's around us, how we discern what's needed, how we critique assumptions. So absolutely, I agree.
Now, I do want to add, of course, when students, we all work with students, and they will be they are reluctant to study anything that is not part of their major. So when we deal with STEM students, for example, they really don't see the value of the liberal arts. But I read something you wrote, Matt, about why even STEM students, there's only so far STEM takes you, and then there's a certain point at which the humanities are even a part of STEM. Do you want to just tell us what your thought was about that?
Sure. I mean, I think that even, maybe especially for STEM majors, that there are issues within the use of technology that the humanities help deepen and advance STEM work. So, for instance, when one is developing a certain technology, one has to think about the larger questions about who this affects, how it works. And if those questions aren't asked, what we can see is that STEM students just drive on ahead without thought to the deeper ethical issues that can surround the development of technology.
So even the building of a bridge, I think that was the example that you used. What goes into, what are the issues beyond the technology of building a bridge that STEM students should think about?
Right, thinking about what communities does the bridge connect, what spaces, what's the history of the places that are being connected, what are the stories and imaginings people have as they walk over the bridge and look up at the sky or at the river that the bridge is crossing. The humanities can help us think through all of those issues, and if one is not paying attention to those kinds of issues, we can see that bridges get built in places maybe where they shouldn't be, or obliterate communities that have been longstanding, and that's very problematic.
So we've been hearing, of course, the reasons that are being given for eliminating or merging degree programs is declining enrollment. And the humanities, we're being told that the humanities don't pay for themselves. They force colleges to run at a deficit. So are humanities departments to blame themselves for the declines in enrollment? What would you all say to that?
There's a scholar named Christopher Newfield who has looked very carefully at this and has found that you can actually analyze the data in ways that show that the investments that go into these massive STEM programs are actually so expensive, whereas humanities works at a relatively inexpensive point and is able to show a profit for many colleges. But I wanted to go back also and push back a little against the idea that STEM students don't want to study or take these classes, because some of that comes down to the financial aid, where, for instance, if you are on a Pell Grant, you cannot take classes that do not count towards your major. And you are not allowed to have a double major or a minor. And so there are various ways in which the economic models that underlie the system shape what students even feel should be allowed. And so then they think, well, this is how it is set up. Certainly I should not want to take these classes. And I think very often they find themselves feeling a real sense of regret and longing for something bigger in their conversations.
So that will take us to what we hope we will get to about reconfiguring what these majors, what all majors are beginning to look like, and how we might redefine them. But so so I guess I would have to play devil's advocate and say, what is wrong with a university, wanting to fund those programs and help it make a profit? Why do we fault that, or why do we think why do we push back against that idea? And Katina, feel free to jump in at any time, okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think that universities need to be sustainable. They need to be financially viable. That's absolutely true. But they're not meant to be in the business of profit. I think that the longer issue is the long disinvestment in humanities programs and in the erosion of shared governance, and an investment in faculty positions that are sustainable, that are permanent, that are part of the tenure track, and where people are investing in their students longer term. Because there's been disinvestment from those positions, because there's been an increase in adjunct positions at skyrocketing rates across all universities, it becomes harder and harder for faculty and for students to continue digging into those programs. fields. So people have been saying for a long time that if we keep disinvesting in the underlying structures of humanities, if we keep disinvesting in the education, teaching, in the faculty positions, then we're going to starve ourselves out of a discipline. And I think that that's what's been happening in places like West Virginia. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens as a result of many, many decisions happening over time.
So, Matt, you had some points about West Virginia University as well. I wanted just to remind our viewers that this is a university that really sought to cut back on its humanities and liberal arts offerings. Miami University in Ohio has recently done something very similar. They want to merge a lot of liberal arts and humanities programs. Why are universities themselves to blame somewhat for this situation?
Well, I think everything we're talking about is a kind of self-reinforcing cycle, so that, the more a university is building new buildings for the science programs, paying football coaches, millions of dollars a year, all while cutting salaries or cutting full-time faculty, the more we'll see students sort of following that lead. But I would say the biggest problem with that movement is that we are moving towards a more career-driven educational goal. And I think all of this should get us to rewind a little bit and think about what the purpose of education is. While, of course, getting a job is important for any student, and I think as faculty, we all want our students to live fulfilling lives and to be able to support themselves and their families. The idea that to do that, a discipline one studies in college must lead directly to a career, I think, is really wrong-headed. And precisely where the humanities are valuable in careers is that they teach students to think and to think creatively, flexibly. I worry about students who follow a very narrow path towards a career and then maybe decide at some point, wait, that's not the career for me, and then they've invested so much time in a single career path they may not know where to turn.
So you've opened up that question about what is the value of higher ed. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
I think one of the things that's interesting is the perception that the job title and the name of the major ought to align, because as we have seen in the past, some of those decisions don't necessarily play out. There are jobs that you cannot even major in as an undergraduate. You are pre-med, you are pre-law. And the idea that you have to learn certain skills before you are even able to begin that sort of training implies that there are larger spheres that the humanities contributes to. But even more than that, there are some humanities majors that show higher rates of employment immediately upon graduation than, for instance, some computer science degrees. And so I think that there's some faulty logic in play, and that the way that the funding models of universities function serves to reinforce rather than challenge existing narratives that a lot of times are driven by people who do not want to pay for their own employee job training.
That's true.
I would just say that I want to give two examples of fields where a kind of humanities approach might not be thought of as the first option, but is really important. So in the medical fields, medical humanities is a growing area, and in part because people have realized that doctors need to be able to communicate well, that communication with patients, human-to-human contact is deeply important to how well a doctor does their job. And I think similarly, I do a lot of technology development, and the best developers I work with, they don't just code well, they're able to communicate well. And I think that is so important.
Right now, a lot of colleges are being ranked by the salaries that their students make. I have seen that. What do you think? What do you all think about that? I mean, you look at U.S. News reports. I believe that salary earned is a criterion for how we value the degree and the value of it.
Well, I think one of the more compelling statistics is social mobility, and that's one of the areas where CUNY really shines. I mean, I think that job training is not a bad thing. I think thinking about the career pathways that people move into is really important. But I don't think that looking just at the number itself is going to give you enough information. I think looking at the ways that people are moving within the social spaces, moving within the economy, and able to build a lives for themselves and their families, that enables them to do the work that they want to do in the world.
So we know that that is important. I mean, we obviously know that students have to make a living and they want to have an income. We do find, I think, Mary, you alluded to this, that there is somewhat of a misconception. Not all STEM fields guarantee you a big salary when you graduate college. Many of them, most of them, don't. Engineering is one that does. but many others actually don't. And there is data that shows that liberal arts majors ultimately catch up, and not on their deathbed. Long before that, they into their careers, after a couple of years, they have salaries that measure up with many of the STEM fields. You've also alluded to the point that there are careers out there that will exist, that don't exist right now, and that if you are in a very narrow focused field, you will not be able to expand and take advantage of the opportunity. So, Mary, you have said, I know, this notion of return on investment is something that annoys you, I guess is the word. Tell us what you think about that and why.
So I think there's a few problems with the model of that. Though I will say that public universities tend to have a better return on investment because the amount that students are spending on their education is less. And we can talk about the whole student loan problem as part of what feeds into this, perception of the decline in the humanities. But the other part of this, I was on the Department of Ed website the other day, and they have a college scorecard. And you can put in the name of the college and you can get some data, but the data that you get is mostly about what your salary is likely to be. And it's an average income, first of all, but also it's naturalizing the idea that getting a bigger income is the goal of college. And as we've seen throughout COVID and in the wake of it, and this kind of discussion of the so-called quiet quitting, and a lot of the ways that people talk about Gen Z as not necessarily wanting to have a career that occupies every hour of their day, there is a sense that, if we are going to use metrics, if we are going to measure things, that we probably want to measure quality of life, job satisfaction, flexibility, a sense of feeling fulfilled and having a meaningful job alongside salary.
Now, as a former English major, I would like to see more students drawn to the humanities, and I'm going to ask all of my guests, what can we do to boost enrollments in the humanities?
I mean, I do think that the field I am in, digital humanities, has a little bit of a role to play in that I think that at an introductory level, at the level of general education, technology can help students become interested in starting to explore the humanities. I don't think that's the end game, and I think for my field to really follow that path, it would need to reconfigure itself a little bit into more of a general education discipline. But I would just say that I really believe that it's important for students to see themselves in the work that they're doing in classes, that they have to be able to connect their lives to what they're studying. And so as a discipline, the more we can do that, which involves sort of rethinking older canons of literature, thinking about new approaches, I think the more students will become invested in humanities topics.
Can we reconfigure these majors in some way? I think you're alluding to that, you're hinting at how we could do that. Do you have any thoughts about what we could do right now or in the coming years to have students be drawn to these fields? Should we offer more specialization within a major?
I mean, I want to think not about how we can design programs that will appeal to this or that individual student. I think part of the problem with some of these more STEM-driven fields is the effort to kind of look at the consumer model. And that part of what we need to do is think more institutionally about how we will do this. So my first step would be to have something similar to, I teach at Baruch College, and every student who graduates from Baruch College must have a minor. And so, unlike many of the other students in the CUNY system, they do take a humanities minor even if they're getting a BBA. And you find a lot of students taking classes that they would not have had the chance to take otherwise and finding themselves engaged, excited, fulfilled. And so I think some of this is about changing the funding models so that students can actually pursue the directions that their interests lie, maybe not as a major, but at least as a minor.
And broaden their backgrounds and broaden their experiences and make them more the kinds of people that employers want, by the way. Employers say they want, their ideal candidate is a STEM person with a humanities background. Now, it's not only the undergrads who are worried, of course, we're worried about our undergrads. Katina, we also worry about our PhD students who are in programs now. I know when I got my PhD, it was with the idea of teaching in a university. So, that really was my goal. But now that is not always an outcome. So what are graduate students looking at, and what can they be thinking about for their PhDs if they don't get a university job?
Oh, I mean, I think that the kinds of roles that people go into have been so varied for such a long time, and in fact, there's been work done over decades to bring more visibility to the kinds of positions that people are in every sector of society, in corporations, in nonprofits, in government, in policy relevant work. I think that a big thing that needs to change, building on some of what Mary was saying about some of the systemic questions, is the public rhetoric around the humanities. I think is one of the things that can really dissuade not only students perhaps from taking courses, but also might influence students' parents from what they're willing to support when they're talking to their children about what their futures are going to look like. And I think that in that, faculty and practitioners have a real role to play in thinking about how our work connects with different publics. You know, what are the things that we're doing that are relevant to the communities around us? What are the ways that we are celebrating scholarship that doesn't just talk inwardly to other scholars, but that really connects in other spaces as well?
What are you, I know you have a book out that really talks about taking your PhD beyond the classroom. What are some of the areas that you see current PhD humanities holders going into as well? What are they doing?
Oh, all kinds of things. And I'm sure that Mary and Matt could add to this as well. But there's people working as technologists, as developers, people working in ethics positions in technology companies. There's folks who are working in government and in nonprofits, in funding agencies. Really, there's no area that I can think of where there's not a benefit for humanities scholars.
And where you could get a position, a fulfilling position with the PhD, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, we are running out of time, so I'm coming down to your last thoughts about where you think we should be heading, could be heading. So let me just throw it open to everybody. What are your thoughts right now?
I mean, I will say that public universities especially need new kinds of investments from states, and I think for that to happen, universities also need to make their work intelligible to the larger publics. And I think that in the humanities, we need to also think about new modalities, thinking about how we can incorporate activities like building things, websites, editions into the work we do to sort of get students invested in that work. But it's hard to do it in a state of constant austerity.
True. Mary?
100%.
Yeah.
And my own scholarship focuses a lot on the way that economics plays out in literary texts. And so one of the things that I keep coming down to are these bottom line considerations. We have to fix the student debt situation. And so much of the way that money is loaned and interest is collected is making it so that it does not seem feasible to study in the humanities because the debt will be so high and people who want to do it are not able. And so I think, for a humanities person to say follow the money,
Right.
But it really does come down to restoring state investment, which is at the lowest levels it has ever been, and fixing student debt issues.
Katina, the last word is yours.
I would say that I think universities, and especially public universities, really need to shift away from a model that emphasizes prestige and find ways of valuing the kinds of publicly engaged work that we collectively think will benefit our communities.
And what you have mentioned to me that mushrooms have provided an example for you of what universities can learn. Want to just tell us quickly what you see around you that we can benefit from?
I think
I'm not letting you off the hook with this one.
There's a lot wrong in higher education today, and if we think about universities perhaps as a rotting log where many things are not going the way that they should, that we might also look for the spaces of indeterminacy and unexpected beauty where something might emerge to digest those rotting materials and produce something new and nourishing in its place.
And that's a lovely way to end. And I thank you all for joining me today, Matt Gold, Mary McGlynn, and Katina Rogers. Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. According to ASCD Smart Brief, not all countries are embracing technology for young learners, especially those countries used to high reading achievement. In response to a drop in student scores in the nation's progress in international literacy study, Sweden is reducing its emphasis on technology and digital learning and is emphasizing print books. The government also plans to remove formally mandatory tablets from preschools and end digital learning for children under 6. Add AI literacy to the growing list of what students need to know. Educators are recognizing that banning AI tools such as ChatGPT will not prepare students for a future, and knowing how AI operates is essential. Education Week warns that AI will have an impact on many careers, not just computer science, and that literacy in what it can and cannot do must be a part of education today. Banning books is on the rise in schools and libraries. ASCD Smart Brief reports on countermeasures being taken to provide readers with access to books that reflect LGBTQ, Black history, and other diverse perspectives. One response has been the Banned Book Program. Created by the Digital Public Library of America, it alerts readers to banned books in their area and offers free access to these targeted titles. Education Week reports that there is growing support for a 4-day school week. Over half of surveyed adult Americans favor the idea, double the number of 2 decades ago. This is true even for adults with children under 18 years of age. We'd like to know how our viewers feel about this. Are you in support of a 4-day school week? Send us an email at cunyedcast@gmail.com and tell us what you think. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Stay with us for important conversations about education that matter to you. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.